Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. My guest today is Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now, this interview was recorded a number of years ago when I had just recently edited Ryan's poetry book. So I edited a poetry book of his called FORTIFIED CASTLES. I was really involved in the revision process and editing process for this book, all the way from just giving him feedback on early drafts. He wrote a poem actually dedicated to me based on some ranting I had done about the movie Twilight and I think also the High School Musical movies. And I've known Ryan for a long time and kind of, we've done a lot of collaborative stuff together. We co-created the 95 Books hashtag. So if you're aware of the 95 Books reading challenge or you're not aware of it, either way, you can go to 95books.com, get more information about the whole 95 Books reading challenge, which, in a nutshell, challenging you to read 95 books in a single year. And so at 95books.com, I have a bunch of information about how you might be able to do that, kind of free booklet you can use, give us some tips on how to increase your reading. You don't have to read 95 books in a year, but minimally you may want to read more. So if you want to get a hold of that, go to 95books.com. The show notes for this episode are at jonathanball.com/9. So if you go there, you can find links to anything we kind of mention, like books or whatever we talk about. You can find links to Ryan's own book. There's also a video that accompanies this. So if you want to see a kind of a talking heads Skype recording video, there's a few moments where maybe Ryan holds something up to the camera. So obviously, you're not going to be able to see that online. Or if you want just links to different things that Ryan mentions, there's all sorts of stuff about Ryan on my website. And so everything is going to be linked from the show notes at jonathanball.com/9. Again, jonathanball.com/9. And here is Ryan Fitzpatrick. So thank you, Ryan, for talking to me. I want to talk to you about Fortified Castles and the editing process for Fortified Castles. Yes, the dueling books.
Yeah.
And the specific reason I thought you would be a good person to talk to about poetry editing is just because, because I was an editor for this book, which is the first time I've officially edited a poetry book for a press. But before we kind of get into the actual editing process, could you maybe just talk a bit about where the title came from and how the project itself itself started for you?
Which one do you want first? Do you want where the project came from or the title?
Either one, because I think a lot of people don't understand that the title is a literary reference.
Well, it's a theory reference.
Or a theory reference.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of reviews that didn't seem to catch that.
Well, it would require you to have a working knowledge of Julia Kristeva.
Yeah.
Which is this chapter or a section, I think, in Powers of Horror, which I was reading when I first started writing these, called The Fortified Castle. And I remember at a certain point the manuscript was called The Fortified Castle. And
I think I told you to change that.
No, you did. You did.
To Fortified Castles.
Which was snappier. It's a snappier title.
Well, it also refers, I think, metaphorically to the poems as fortified castles, as opposed to the book as a fortified castle, which seemed to me more in line with your sort of idea of the social purpose of the poems and of the book.
Yeah. So I was pulling from that. I wish I had reread it, because I'm about to give some kind of terrible definition. But what I was attracted to in it was the idea that when faced with the abject, what subjects do is they kind of shut themselves off from the social, from the abject, from having to deal with it. So it becomes a retreat into the self a bit. So I was reading that at the same time that I was doing these experiments, because books tend to come out of a couple places for me. Either I have a brilliant idea off the top, and then and then the whole book centers around the concept, or I kind of work from the ground up, which is very much what this project was, which was kind of working from a set of formal problems. So, and the formal problem was, after Fake Math came out, I noticed there were a handful of poems in there where I was kind of exploring this like lyric I that wasn't me, and I was thinking like, what would happen if I really pushed at that, and thinking about like, so what I did was I started just collecting kind of like diaristic phrases. So like, and those are the titles. Like the titles of the poems are kind of vestiges of those original searches. Because what I did was I took those, and at first I just plugged them into Google, and I realized the material I was getting was too loose. So then I started plugging them into Google with quotation marks around, like around the whole sentence, which of course searches for, instead of searching for each individual word, it searches for the sentence, pages where the sentence appears as a whole. And I was happier generally with the search results to work with. And then the first draft was which the kind of first version of I'm Obsessed With It would have come out of that kind of early work, were kind of like these direct collages of stuff from those searches.
Sure.
That's kind of how it started, yeah.
So you started kind of collaging and working on material out of these searches initially. And I remember at one point, if I remember right, you had an actual book draft, or at least you had enough poems for a book. Based on that structure, so a title that is a phrase like I'm obsessed with it, that you'd run through a search string, and then you'd assembled basically poems of 12 lines with 3 quatrains, like 3 stanzas of 4 lines each. And you had you had a whole book of that. And then at some point I remember you brought it, I can't remember if I read that version or not, but I remember like at some point.
I think so, because I remember
early on I did.
The big organizational principle, because there are some poems that went through 4 drafts, but generally everything went through 3 drafts, because there are 3 kind of full manuscripts. So one in 2008, one in, I thought it was 2011, but apparently it was 2012, and then one last year, right before the book came out. And that first draft, if we can call it that, was just basically the stack of poems that I had written with this procedure.
Sure.
And I think you had seen that because you made the suggestion at that point that maybe the way you should organize this is to just alphabetize them.
Well, I just done that with Clockfire. I just alphabetized. You were, I remember now. You were trying to like think of a way to basically organize the poems like into something like a book, because they kind of all looked visually the same. They all sort of had the same technique.
So the risk was that the poems, it would just be like 100 pages of whatever of the same poem over and over and over.
Yeah, and I don't remember if I said that, like, that's a risk, or if you just decided that at some point. But clearly at some point you decided, I need to have this start and end section, because you end up with like 3 sections in the book. A section at the start that is not at all organized in that same way. At least, you don't have the titles that are search procedures. As far as I know, you might still be searching those things, but you don't have like an actual I something phrase.
In the couplets. So in the first section of the book, 21st Century Monsters, which I'd written completely separate from this.
Yeah, I remember you had a chapbook of that.
Yeah, so it came out as a chapbook that Trisha Eddy in Edmonton put out. And the intention was that I wrote that and it was just going to come out as the chapbook and maybe get collected down the line. It wasn't until I wrote the final section, Friendship is Magic, that I realized that they were actually working some of the same territory. So
the same basic structure.
Yeah, and it was me deciding that I'd like a longer book, so I put these bookends on, and then as soon as I put the bookends on and sent it to you, you went, that middle section is all of a sudden way too long. Yeah,
well, what had happened again, so you kind of went from a first draft, or let's just call it the first draft, the first substantial draft that you had, where you had roughly like 90 poems of these like 12-line poems that have like I'm whatever, I this, I that.
Yeah.
And then you had this start and end section that you added, which were these they're basically couplets, like a series of longer couplet poems, and they had a very different tone. They weren't as focused with these I statements or anything along the same lines.
Yeah.
And you just kind of put that at the start at the end. So you had like kind of if I remember right, it was roughly 120 pages now. So you kind of had 30, 90, and 30. And my thing was, you seemed like you just could have like put this book inside a sandwich, like in like Fortified Castles like this, and it seemed really unbalanced to me. So it seemed like, I think the thing I had suggested at one point was to kind of minimally kind of bring the middle part down, so it was only like the ratio was more like 30, 60, 30.
No. Sorry. What you suggested. I've got the letter in the other room.
Okay, well, I thought it was something along those lines.
What you suggested was what you need to do. What I think you should do is just cut the middle section in half. Just cut it in half.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So it was more like.
And I actually think because I think you had suggested 40 pages, and I felt I was pushing it at 50 pages.
Yeah, something like that. So that it was basically 30 or 40 pages shorter than the current draft.
Yeah.
So so that it went. I remember like the idea was like, so it would go from like 120 pages to like 80 pages or something, or like 130 to 90 or something along those lines. And I think I suggested you just hack and slash the middle section and leave the other sections, like just in terms before you started really revising. Yeah. And I don't know precisely, I can't remember precisely what you did, but you did more or less come closer to the ratio I suggested.
Well, we didn't talk. I don't know if we talked about what I did.
No, you just kind of like whatever. You just kind of like didn't reply to me, more or less. like I don't remember if you said anything, but you basically like stopped sending me drafts of it, and then like I didn't see it again really until.
Because it took me a long time to get to the next draft.
But I didn't know if you were like taking my advice or if you just thought my advice was stupid and I was being a dick to you.
Yeah.
And so.
So let me explain to you what I did then.
But that's what I wanted to know. Like, what did you do it, and how did you decide what poems to cut? Because when I saw that new draft, as we'll talk about a little later, like even the poems you left were substantially altered, almost to the point of unrecognizability.
Yeah.
But what did you actually do then, like in response to my early editorial intervention, I suppose you'd say?
Yesterday, because you sent me the poems you wanted to look at yesterday, and you had sent me of the I'm Obsessed with It. You sent me this 2008 version, which was in Dandelion.
Yeah, I published in Dandelion alongside an interview with you.
Yeah, and then the 2014 version, which is the version in the book. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I went to look at the draft, the draft that I did edits on, which is the middle version, that I realized there was a missing link in between those two poems, and so. But I went to, so the first thing I did, because I actually took your advice really seriously, because I went, oh yeah, John's right, this is nuts now. But also it was an opportunity to take the poems that I was then recognizing, after not looking at them for a while, recognizing that they were a little easy in spots. Like that the language would drift into abstraction a bit too quickly, and like, so what I did was, and this is the first time I'd ever done something like this, is I got really analytical with the draft. It was like, what would Jonathan Ball do?
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is going to show up on the camera, but this is the page from the draft, my working draft.
I'll just scan it in, show it, and then if it doesn't.
So if you take a look at that, you'll notice that there's a bunch of highlighter ink on there. So what I did was, I'm going to try to remember my code because I didn't make myself a legend. Which I should have, but whatever. This will be interesting for future archivists and digital humanities scholars. So what I did was I just bought a pack of highlighter pens with 4 colors, and I went, okay, each one of these colors is going to indicate a different thing that's going on. So anytime I highlighted, and I went through the whole, like I think it was 96 pages or whatever the whole stack was, and I did this. So yellow was, this sentence is really abstract and really boring.
Sure.
Blue was, this sentence is abstract, but kind of interesting. Like, I'm interested in what's going on in it. And then orange, I think I may have only used 3 of the colors. Orange was, this sentence is concrete and really great. And so what I did that is so I would have this kind of visual indication of what I should cut. So rather than kind of making these gut decisions, it was like, oh, this page is filled with like yellow. It's like so abstract and boring. So that was easy cut, right?
Sure.
And I think I got rid of 20 pages of the book that way. 20 pages of the manuscript. But it also let me see where the kind of like imbalances in the poems were. So this one, like the middle paragraph is blue. So it's abstract and like kind of interesting, but like not really. But the last paragraph is like bright orange. So it's clearly like I'm ending strong on that one. So what that allowed me to do is it allowed me to kind of think about the balance of each of the poems. Sure. I kind of devised a system as I was editing to account for that. The other thing that I did is in the margins of each of the poems, I just kind of jotted down in pen like kind of vague thematics or things that were going on. So that I was spotting in other poems in the manuscript. So here I've got like the line in the poem is, "The song in the ad upset me so much that I cried for days," and I've written in pen beside it media.
Sure.
Which I could have written earlier in the poem because there's a line about movies, which is why like I picked up on that, and then all of a sudden I went, oh, that's something that's happening. That's something I could like actually play with. Yeah. So I went through and did that, and then I sorted through the manuscript, and I kind of pulled 50. I said, these are the 50 I'm going to work with. And it was purely based on these kind of like decisions informed by this kind of like analytic work I did on the actual paper pages of the manuscript. And then when I had those 50 pages, like after I had cut like a good chunk of the manuscript, I sequenced them, or tried to loosely sequence them around those thematics that I jotted in the margins. Oh, here's 5 pages that kind of talk about media. Here's like a handful of pages that talk about addiction. Here's a handful of pages that talk about I don't know. I'd have to go through and look and see what they were. So those kind of arrangements informed it, and I gave myself permission when I was actually editing it to change it on the fly, depending on what the needs of the sequence was.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a very interesting approach because, as you say, you're really, in a sense, quantifying like what's happening in the poems, which you know, especially in poems, can be very abstract and difficult sometimes to pin down, even for the writer. I think, especially when you're working with a lot of poems. So it's interesting to me, it's almost like you know how somebody might study for an exam, you know, with the different highlighters and really trying to just make as concrete as possible that otherwise kind of abstract information, so you can just visually, as you say, kind of in this case, just kind of visually at a glance see like what the balance of the ratio is. Because I noticed like you moved a lot of the lines around within the poems and so on, so I'm guessing like that facilitated that line editing as well.
Yeah. Because I set up a bunch of rules for myself, because I'd never worked with because I'd worked with sequences before, but never anything this long. Yeah. And I really wanted it to not be, here are 50 pages of the same poem over and over. I wanted there to be a kind of arc to the section. And so I was thinking about kind of formally thinking about the 50 pages as an arc, and then, but also thinking about how to balance sections of the manuscript, because they're like not discrete but kind of loosely bordered sections.
Sure. Like you're talking about thematically connected in that second section
and tonally.
So it's like subsections of the second section is what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then within that, to find ways to organize each of the individual poems to be able to account for some of these thematics in different ways on the level of the poem. And also to find ways to have the poems bleed into one another, either through repeated syntactic structures or repeated images or stuff like that. So trying to find a way to make the piece work holistically, but also to kind of do these kind of like this micromanaging of what's going on poem to poem. And so it took me a few months to kind of work through it. I kind of did like 2 or 3 a day, but not every day, because I think I was reading for my exams at that point?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because it was about 2008, so yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like a magician revealing his tricks, but I'm going to reveal them anyway. So the big thing that helped me realize the kind of a holistic arc was really putting a clamp down on the pronouns.
Sure.
So now that I say it, anybody who sees this interview is going to notice is this. But if you notice, like the first, I can't remember how many, like 15 or 20 pages, the only pronoun that appears is I. So in between the edits of this specific poem, I'm obsessed with it because it appears really early in the manuscript. It's like, I think I looked, it was like the 5th, 6th, 7th poem in the sequence. So in that middle draft, in that 2012 draft, I get really loose with the pronouns. So there's a lot of like lines like, what was the line I was looking at? You pull strips of copper wire from my face, which is not a line that appears in the first draft, but appears in the second draft. But it's a direct address to a you.
Sure.
But because I had decided to put this poem in the sequence in the place that I did, that line had to change to I pull strips of copper wire from my face.
Oh, okay, sure.
Which I actually think is like strangely, like that shift in pronoun is more interesting. But I can't identify why. There's a cop-out answer. But so at a certain point, like I introduced the you, and then it was I and you, and then I held off introducing the we until a certain point after that, and then right at the end you get appearances of they. So where the book kind of gets ugliest. Just
to kind of look back again, just at a couple of lines from when I was obsessed with it. And the one thing that really stuck out to me was how really I'm just embracing culture. So you've got this line, really I'm just embracing culture, which in earlier drafts was the last line.
Yeah.
And then you moved it to the start of the last stanza. So I'm just curious, do you remember like why specifically you might have done that? Because the other thing that's interesting with I'm obsessed with it is, again, if you just compare the last draft with the first draft, almost none of the poem is still there. Like there's very little that actually remains, and what is there kind of reorganized.
I did a map of it. Like that's between the first and last draft. There are bits and pieces.
So like, what motivated you to? I guess you kind of answered this already a little bit. You probably found a lot of the stuff was too abstract. You didn't like the ratio, so you just excised or reworked those lines. But why did you actually shift the last line up in that manner? Like, did you remember what the motivator was for that?
We had talked about that line because you really liked that line.
Yeah, I liked it as an ending line too.
Yeah, I thought I ended up, because I think it stayed at the end of the poem, I think specifically for as long as it did because you said you liked it.
Yeah.
But when I was doing the final edit, I found it really ponderous. It's like, and I thought it worked better as a kind of like almost like a topic sentence to that stanza.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I liked it at the end because it was kind of ponderous, and it almost seemed to sum up like the movement of the poem. But I could see, like, in a lot of ways, you didn't like the poems to end definitely in that way. Like, it seemed to me like you weren't really looking for definite endings to the poem, and for them to tonally feel like endings. Like, you made a lot of decisions that some of which I liked and some of which I wasn't a big fan of, just because it's not my style, right? Like, my style is especially in Clockfire, which I the first time I had seen your first draft, I had just come off Clockfire, writing Clockfire. But almost every poem in Clockfire like turns towards this, flip or this ponderous end, which at one point actually I felt was becoming too much of a formula. I tried to scale it back in the manuscript, but I think that's a nice moment where you kind of are seeing a kind of a shift in like. Or let's say there's a tension or contrast or conflict there, I guess, between, like, in this case, your editor's style and pushing, and like where you kind of want to push it. So I know that a lot of people that I talk to, especially writers in my my creative writing classes, like they're very concerned with what an editor would do to their work. So I guess one thing maybe is worth kind of jumping into
am I,
here.
but probably in the opposite of what what they are. They're probably
Well,
like, are they like, how can I please this hypothetical editor?
yeah. Well, or worried that the editor will destroy somehow the thing in them
Oh, okay.
that they see as valuable. So I think they see. I see a lot of that, like both. So I guess when you have a kind of editor that has like I'm not a really pushy editor, but I
It's
think
not like you said when I sent it to this version to you that it's not like you ever said. This is because this is the first time you're asking me this question. The book's been out for how long?
like I saw what you were doing, and I thought,
Yeah.
well, I don't really like that, but I can see what Ryan's doing, so I
Yeah.
left it alone because there's a
Yeah.
logic to it. But
Yeah.
I guess
Well, it's not like the other thing that's happening in this poem is moving that line opens up another kind of closure to the ending, because the opening line is the song in the ad upset me so much, and then the final line is I've been quietly humming the fabric of our lives for days now, which I actually ended up really liking, because that's a jingle, right? That's a commercial jingle,
yeah,
like
and
an
then you've
old
got
commercial jingle, but
and you've got like now it's I guess what you call it a mirroring, or you're kind of just returning to the same theme,
Yeah.
literally like a musical theme.
yeah,
Because it kind of gets returned to. So yeah, like to me, like it was a thing where, like, as an editor, I saw the logic of it. I kind of saw what you were doing.
Yeah.
I kind of liked it in the previous version more, but I mean, I wasn't going to push on it because it's your book, and I think a lot of people don't understand. Like a good editor, at least, it is facilitating the book
yeah,
that you want to write, not
Yeah.
writing the book that they want to write. And I think a lot of editors, I mean, I've never had a really truly negative experience with an editor personally. And if I did, I would just put my foot down.
yeah.
And
Well, and I have, but I won't.
Yeah.
I won't name names.
But,
But sometimes people get like my kind of pet peeve is not when people get pushy, because I don't mind it when people get pushy or assertive because they believe something should happen. My issue is usually when you get pushy and don't explain why you're getting pushy. It's the kind of assumption, but this is the right way to do things.
Sure.
Because there's really no, because I could have easily written a different version of this poem that ended with that line that would have worked just as well, just in a different way.
Sure. Yeah. But, it's not what you wanted to do. And the other sort of line that I remember, there were a couple of moments in the poems where I was really invasive. And so one example of that is not one of the two poems that I put up like for the comparisons, but there's a poem, I Want to Feel Free, on 44, where the line originally was I am an American, and I had to change it to Je suis un American, which is bad French for I am an American. And I remember like
that line, that changed line got a laugh in Montreal. So
yeah.
Well,
I hope so, because I mean, let me just talk a little about why I was suggesting that edit, and then I want you to talk about why you went along with the edit.
Okay, my answer is going to be much shorter than yours.
Sure. So I saw, I am an American, and the previous line above there is, our deepest kiss happened on the night of Harper's first election victory. My GPS keeps me on the right track. I am an American. That was sort of more or less the earlier draft. I can't remember precisely because I'm reading from the book, but it was I am an American. So I looked at it and thought, well, Kiss when Harper's elected, right track. Now you can easily read that politically, like the right as a conservative ideology. I'm an American. Well, if you're an American, you might applaud Harper's first election victory. To me, like, it all made sense. But I didn't like how I'm an American was a bland sentence. I felt it was just a bland sentence, and I felt it wasn't really doing much. But I thought it made sense. Yeah. And so my fix to it was, well, what if we just kind of complicate it a bit somehow? And I was trying to think of different ways to rewrite it. And then I couldn't really find one that I thought worked better for the rhythm and for the amount of syllables there were, and like I just felt like I'm an American worked in a lot of ways, but I didn't like it. And then it just hit on me, well, if you change it to Je suis un American, not only do you have, I mean, I don't know French very well, so I suspected it was bad French, although I didn't really know enough French to know if it was. Well, because
American is not like the French word for American.
Yeah, and so I suspected it was bad French, like, you might find in Canada or America. I liked the fact that "an" would change to "un" in my bad French, and you would get this un-American, like this un-American, unintentional un-American phrase. You know, you mean to say I am an American, but you might just as easily be saying I am un-American. And I like the kind of the way it convoluted and complicated the line, even though it didn't really, and it kind of changed it into almost a non-meaning sort of line. So it's just, I like how it just kind of like basically left it the same in a lot of ways, but then all at the same time it kind of complicated or made it more convoluted and complex and added this interesting, I almost want to say like international element to it in a manner of speaking.
Well, here's the reason why. Other than everything you've already said, the reason why I actually really like it is because it reminds me of that JFK speech, "Ich bin," where he says "Ich bin ein Berliner," and I remember somebody telling me at a certain point that that's actually incorrect. Like it should be Berlinischer. Is that right?
I'm not sure, but I was thinking of that actually as well. Like I like the idea that you would be trying to explain your identity in another language, and you'd be unintentionally making a statement that you felt was wrong. And to me, it really played into this larger theme of like your identity is bound up in these political statements and these identity statements. And they mean one thing to you and another thing to everyone else. So you were more leaning on that thematic idea. Like I was looking at it from a craft angle initially. Like I just didn't like how the thing sounded, and I thought it made sense, but could make less sense in a way that would be productive. But then I thought it also made sense thematically. Like after I kind of came up with a couple of options, because at one point we were asked by Talon Books, like, do you want to just put the correct French in here? Like, here it is. And we said no.
It was no.
Which I think they were a little confused about, but
there were a few moments where like they were really wonderful to work with. Mm-hmm. Like it's like the smoothest editorial process I've ever been involved in. But there were those moments where where you and I would decide on something completely unsyntactical, and they would push back. No.
And sometimes it was actually really useful. Like in Abstinence Vampires, there's that line about boys assaulting each other, or the immigrant solutions in GTA. And, and I remember the Talon Books came at us with, well, I don't get why you have GTA in here. Like, what does this have to do with the Greater Toronto Area? And of course, if you don't italicize it, then it's not Grand Theft Auto. It's not necessarily. So it was just a sort of like simple thing where you end up adding italics and just explain them. Oh yeah, he means Grand Theft Auto, and I knew that. It never occurred to me that GTA would mean Greater Toronto Area because I've never lived in Toronto. I've never heard that it made sense once they said it, but. So, even like those sort of moments of confusion were sometimes really productive and useful. And that's where like the ambiguity wouldn't be productive, or the confusion wouldn't help, which is kind of interesting. The other sort of shift I suggested that you did go along with, as opposed to a number of the ones you didn't go along with, is at the last. You had the last two poems of the book in the opposite order, and I suggested switching them. And it's because you had ended the book with a poem called "Heartwarming Moments," and it begins, "My heart, however, overflowed with hope," and it ends with, "I promise we will ask. What happens to a world as it dies? What happens to a system as it dies? I promise we will ask," which works great as an ending. And I suggested you switched it with the previous poem, which at the time was "Weepy Nostalgia," which ends with, it begins, "Count us not among the mournful who wake with the good old days in our bowed mouths." And you have this "count us not," this kind of biblical almost syntax. And then at the end you end with, "It's sort of like a folk revival coming through a loudspeaker, even if it barely counts as haunting." And I suggested you put that at the end. You just basically switch the order of those two poems so that you would end with haunting, and you would have this sort of biblical tone, very different, or at least this kind of rhythmic, chant-like, incantatory tone. That's very different from the rest of the book.
And it kind of undercuts the kind of hopefulness, like by being a bit more cutting and a bit more ambiguous at the end.
So why did you go along with that? Because it totally changes the tone of the ending. Like, it's not a book that you have to read in sequence, of course.
Yeah.
But it is a major shift, and again, it's a tonal shift that is really consistent with how I write, and less consistent with maybe how you have written in the past.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to know, like, why you went along with that.
It was a tough decision, and I don't even know if I still agree with it.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is like this thing that you just identified is like if you end, depending on which poem you end with, it rewrites the entire sequence.
I think so. But
like even though I actually think the ending of Heartwarming Moments is way less hopeful. Like what it's like.
You're getting the world dying.
The way I've read it, or the way I read it, is like what happens to a world as it dies. What happens to a system as it dies? A promise will ask.
Yeah.
Like it's not like the only thing that you can promise at the end of that is that like you can ask about it. Ask what's going to happen.
I'll find out. I'll ask that guy what happens when the world dies.
So I think what might have gone into my decision is the fact that the end of that poem I think is actually not very hopeful, but it's kind of ambiguously not hopeful. Or ambiguously hopeful. Like there was that review that Daniel put up yesterday where I had this conversation at a reading with him, and I'm like, yeah, I find that entire final sequence just a huge bummer. And he's like, no, I thought it was really hopeful and sincere. And I'm like,
I kind of see what he's saying.
It's not that sincere, man.
Well, I mean, I think there's a sincerity to it, which you can read as hopeful. I think it just gets coded as hopeful, but I don't think I think it is hopeful. Like I think it's like sincerely not hopeful, like a Cormac McCarthy novel or something.
Yeah.
But
so I think that was the reason why I went along with switching them. Is it like made that kind of like it made the hopelessness more obvious in a poem that's filled with this kind of like sincerity or feigned sincerity or. Because I think it's both, depending on which part you're reading.
So another kind of question I had was, with Abstinence Vampires, unlike a lot of the other poems, that's a poem you rewrote more or less by rearranging the stanzas and by adding stanzas. So like I counted through it, and the last draft of it added 6 stanzas, which are 6 couplets, basically.
Yeah.
And it rearranged all the other couplets, except for the last one. The only thing you really kept in the same place is the second one and the 15th one, which is the ending one. And I'm just kind of curious, to know about like how did you make the decision to like reorganize and to add in things like that? Like when you're looking at the poem, in other words, it wasn't a scenario like, well, this line's weak, I'm going to replace it with something else. It was really a scenario where you're adding material. So I guess what was in a poem like that, or when you're trying to like add stanzas or add material in like that, like why are you doing like what's the lack that you're noticing that you feel you need to bulk up or does that make sense? And I have an actual answer for it. Oh, great, perfect. It's going so smooth.
These don't usually go smooth for you. So this is in the first sequence of the book, 21st Century Monsters, which is a sequence, right?
Yeah.
So it's very invested in the kind of in a kind of seriality. But this is like this draft. This was actually the first one that I wrote for the sequence, and it was before I knew I was going to write a sequence, because I wrote this one, and then I wrote another one kind of in the same style, because I was like, oh, writing in these couplets is actually really interesting.
Well, I think you wrote it as a joke initially, didn't you? Just because I was complaining about Twilight. I was just complaining about how there's vampire T-shirts everywhere. Like I saw it in a clothing store, and there's a whole vampire T-shirt section. And I didn't understand. I guess I didn't understand how popular this thing was.
Well, and we had this conversation because you were like, those aren't real vampires.
Yeah, I was like, vampires.
And then somehow in the conversation we got to, is it Stephanie Clark? Stephanie Meyer? Stephanie Meyer.
Yeah.
How like. Actually, like one of the things that's going on in the book, apparently, I haven't read it. I watched the movie. Is that
actually watched the movie?
It's almost like that she's stumping for abstinence. It's like
I don't remember. I mean, I haven't read the books, but there was something about this vampire baby, and it was going to kill her. I might be totally confused, but that was my understanding, and I was complaining about. I was just complaining about what I understood as like. this weird moral, like I didn't like how vampires become even more Christian than they already were.
Yeah. So the title came out of it. It's a reference to the book, but it's more a reference to this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That you and I are the only people who have access to that conversation. Yeah. Our memories are already fuzzy. So like the first draft I wrote it as a joke. I think the best kind of poem ideas come out of just jokes and dares.
Sure.
So I wrote it as a joke. So it's got all these kind of like terrifying lines, like just kind of playing with this idea of knowing that I was writing it for you, like these like monstrosity, but always but also like teen culture, tween culture, and then kind of sexual politics. So so you get these kind of like super ugly lines in it. It's actually the ugliest poem in the book, mm-hmm. really. Which is funny because there's moments like in other parts of the book where I kind of vein towards it, and it's right at the beginning where like I just put it out there. So I wrote this, and then I wrote another, however many are in that first sequence, 8.
Yeah, I forget, but 9? You wrote a series of them that became the 21st Century Monsters chapbook.
Yeah, 9. So I wrote 9 of them, and then what I did was I shelved that for a month or two, and then I went back to it with the explicit plan to like edit them together as a suite. So I decided on the sequence and whatever. And because this was the first one I wrote, it was the one that needed the most heavy editing in terms of keeping it in the sequence, because I didn't know what the rules of the sequence were yet when I wrote this. So I didn't cut anything. I was shocked when I looked at this yesterday, I was shocked I didn't cut anything.
You didn't do a lot of revision. Like you did a few places where there was some, significant revision, but for the most part, you just were reordering it and structuring and adding material, which I thought was interesting.
And
it's very different from the obsessed with it.
The stuff that I added was specifically to speak to stuff that was happening in the other poems in the sequence.
Okay.
So a line like changing what might indicate an end of the world scenario is quite important in any new century is trying to speak to the kind of like the apocalyptic rhetoric in some of the other poems.
Sure.
What was the other one? We were tired of the current set of tableaus, Hollywood, Dust Bowl, etc. So we planted trees, this trying to like play with this kind of like I was thinking about it as like a movification of everyday life or of the real world, because there's all kinds of play with like the end of the world, but also one of the things that was going on when I wrote this sequence was that there were tons of like end of the world movies coming out. So those started feeding in, like...
I guess it's 2012, right? So 2012 would have come out, and... Yeah. All the Mayan calendar nonsense.
Yeah, but that was just starting to happen, right? Like, I think the movie 2012 might have come out when I was writing these.
Sure.
Yeah. So, like, it was a lot of trying to fit it in with the rest of the sequence. But also trying to retain like the individual character of that first draft.
Well, I'm also just kind of looking here at this interview that we did in 2008 when you'd kind of done you'd had a first decent draft. With the Fortified Castles poems. At one point, you're talking about craft and how some strategies I find useful as far as craft goes are things like disallowing certain parts of speech or poetic structures. Like the idea that you would set yourself procedures and rules to basically prevent you from doing the kind of poems you'd previously been doing.
Yeah.
And setting yourself sort of restrictions going kind of from project to project.
Yeah.
So that you're actually... basically, the way that you described it to me once is like once you get really good at something, you like will disallow yourself from doing it anymore.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting strategy, and I'm wondering if you still do that, and if you see that as somehow, like, to what degree is that useful in editing, to kind of recognize the strategies and the rules you're using? Like, to what degree do you, in an editing process, feel you need to really attend to those rules, and to what degree do you just feel like now is the time where the rules don't matter anymore? Because I'm just going to... Like, do you still feel bound to those sorts of procedures and rules when you're editing, or just when you're generating?
well, first, I don't ever feel bound to any of them.
Sure.
But often when I'm editing, like, I don't always feel bound to them. Like, the same rules that I set up when I'm writing might not be the same rules that I set up when I'm editing.
Okay.
Or rewriting. And I actually think the kind of shifting procedure can help edit the pieces. So one of the things that I did in terms of shifting procedure for that middle section was I had made this conscious decision that the thing that should happen in Fortified Castles is it should get explicitly political towards the end, as opposed to this kind of vague, like, the thing that, because the thing I was noticing in the earlier draft was it was kind of like all this personal language, and it kind of avoided politics, which I think is powerful, but to make it explicit at the end would rewrite the kind of vagueness of the first half of that sequence. So one of the things that I added, and this was halfway through that final edit that I started doing this, is I started pulling stuff from websites again, which I kind of, in the middle edit, I had stopped doing. So the new stuff that I added was often like just me riffing off the stuff that was already there.
Okay.
But I started going to websites again, and I started collecting. Collecting internet comments and writing them out on the page with the highlighting. I started just writing them out longhand on the page, and I would spend like half an hour to 45 minutes just looking at big stories, and they're usually like horrifying things that were going on. So I remember digging through comments about the Sodder rape chants. I remember digging through comments about George Zimmerman. I remember digging through comments about what else? Just whatever in the span of me editing
was happening.
Yeah. And specifically stuff around around kind of race and gender, and the reason why I go to the internet comments is because by going to the internet comments I could get to the source of this kind of like social defensiveness, because that's a social space where people go, this article is, I'm going to say this very politely, this article is bullshit, this writer doesn't know what they're talking about. So
put up my fortified castle of language.
And multiply that language by 1,000, and then you have the stuff that I was reading for like a month and a half, editing that back half of the book, or however long it was, I can't remember. But just as I was rewriting the poems, threading some of that stuff in, to kind of to make it more explicitly political, and to really lean on the kind of like, to kind of put in, like, almost like invert the book, where the first half of that sequence is like really inward looking, and then the first half is like almost like looking outside the walls a bit. And
that's where the pronouns shifting started to help, I guess, too.
Yeah.
So the last
that's a change in procedure that I used to kind of to shake thing. That was actually to shake the book out of its funk a bit.
Well, I can see how that would give it more of like the feel of a book, and less of the feel and a sequence, and less so, here's a bunch of poems, which was one of my early objections. I felt you just had a bunch of poems, and I thought, well, they're just becoming interchangeable.
Yeah.
Which is, they're not bad.
Which is why I could just alphabetize them.
Yeah, which, I thought was perfectly fine. I mean, I'd just done it with the book, but I'd done a couple other little things with the structure of that.
Yeah.
And it made more sense for Clockfire because it's like a suite of plays. Like, here's the play book, and here's all the books, all the different plays organized alphabetically, so you can find them easily. The last thing I wanted to kind of ask you about editing this book was, you started more or less. I mean, when I say started, you had that first real draft in 2008. So whenever you started writing the poems, you're pretty far along in a sense by 2008. You've got a whole draft book.
Yeah.
You're got a huge sort of revision, revamping it in 2012. It's coming out in 2014. So you have a span of at least 6 years, from, if not longer, from when
I started writing the poems during the tour for Fake Math.
Sure, which would have been what year?
So that's 7 years.
Sure, so 7 year period. that you're, writing and editing, but really, like, let's say 6 years of editing, because it's, since you got a book, it's 6 years till it comes out.
Yeah.
How do you know when to stop editing? Like, this is a big problem, I think, for a lot of people. Either they don't edit enough or they edit too much. But certainly when I think you're kind of like me in this regard, where you tend to do a lot of editing. You tend to maybe do more editing than writing. And you tend to take a long time editing. And especially like the book that I was kind of working on for the same length of time was this book called The Politics of Knives. And I really, again, had that kind of extensive process of editing. And then when it was accepted, then I started throwing out half the book and like rewriting new material. And, I had a kind of extensive editing process with Kevin Connolly at Coach House at that time. And one of the questions, I mean, in that case, I've got a deadline, and the book's going to come out.
That's the answer for this book, is when you're done editing.
When somebody takes it away from you.
When it's published.
There's a great story about Dennis Cooley, where when he was writing Bloody Jack, of course, he's writing it and writing it and writing it, and it's this long poem, it's got all this material in it, and he keeps rewriting it. And apparently at one point, the legend is that at one point David Arneson walks into his office and goes, "That's it, Cooley, you're done. I'm taking the book from you, and you're done, and I'm publishing it."
He wasn't done, because the second edition is revised.
Yeah, I know.
It's it's probably as like I
think he actually says that in the book. I think he put the Arneson conversation into the book at a later point. So that's it, Cooley, you're done. I'm taking it, and you're done.
Yeah.
But so that's your answer. You're done when somebody basically takes things away from you. But I mean, at some point you're approaching a publisher with it.
Yeah, so I have a sense of when I'm done a draft.
Yeah.
It's like usually when you have like a certain amount of pages and you can't do anything with it anymore.
Yeah, sure. And you just feel like any change you make is not making it better or worse.
Yeah.
Sure. And then you got to get somebody else to come in, I guess.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty similar to me.
But I've said to you that 2012 draft, like, I actually consider it like it's a completely different book.
Yeah. Well,
with the same name. Like, I could put that out as like an ebook, and people would like, if this book hadn't existed, like the actual book, that earlier draft could stand as a book, and people would go, "Oh yeah, this is really interesting for this other set of reasons."
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, and it is, especially if you look at a poem like I'm Obsessed with It, I mean, the structure is identical, and it even has some identical lines, but it is a very different poem, and it has different concerns, or some of the same concerns, but, it's interesting, the evolution of this particular book to me, because not only am I kind of on the inside of it, it's sort of seeing it a bit closer. But there's all these huge gaps from my perspective, even, where it just suddenly is this new thing.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, as you say, you can really feel like you're just making another book, as opposed to changing this one.
Well, and that's what I ended up doing in that final draft. Is I just went, okay, this is the book now. Threw my hands up and went, this is the book now. This is what we're writing. It's completely different, even though really it's not. It's coming out of the same base.
Sure. Yeah, once you have that structure in place, like for me, it's about getting structures figured out. And once I have a structure in place, I really can play around inside the structure a lot without, I think, fundamentally altering the material. Like you're altering the material, but the book or that structure is kind of, if that structure is strong, I feel that's the main thing, at least for me. And so I like, and that's sort of how I was approaching, encouraging you with this book, like get that structure locked, and then you can screw around with the poems as much as you want. Like once you have the structure in place, you've got it made in the shade, in a manner of speaking. If you can just kind of get that good structure, you've got like a room there now to flex and play and complicate. Like you can do things like just turn that line into a French line and just add a level of complexity and confusion without breaking the structure. And so, then it becomes like a game of, well, where do I introduce chaos to this structure? Great. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. And thanks for letting me post like the earlier drafts of some of these poems, because I know some people are really hate that idea.
Which is stupid, like, because people are going to recognize that it's a process. Yeah. Right. That it's about going through drafts. I really love reading people's drafts.
Oh, it's great, and especially if when you get a chance to go into an archive or something, and you can see people's when you've never been able to see the drafts and they're not available publicly. It's really instructive, and I feel like I learned a lot looking at drafts and whenever I was possible. And so I think people will learn a lot kind of looking at what you're doing there, especially for a kind of poetry that is not understood popularly as being a process, like and as being edited and revised. I think like there's I think a perception that a lot of this type of work is haphazard, when really it's not.
Drives me crazy. It's like, please explain to me how I can haphazardly put a book together over 7 years.
Yeah, well,
without it being like me saying I spent 7 years and really just like writing it over a week.
Well, there you go. I'll testify that it was 7 years. At least you've done other things during that time, but there was some huge shifts in those poems. So it's great to see. Well, thanks so much, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
All right, have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
So that was Ryan Fitzpatrick and I discussing the process of editing poetry, specifically editing his poetry book, Fortified Castles. I really recommend that book, especially if you want to read that book and listen to this podcast again. It's really worth checking out Ryan's work. Ryan's really an excellent poet, doing some really fascinating stuff. His other book, Fake Math, which I think we mentioned as well, is a really funny, really interesting, really experimental book. Go to 95books.com if you want more information on the 95 Books Challenge that Ryan and I co-created, and go to jonathanpaul.com/9 if you want links about the stuff we discuss and show notes, and even just see a video Skype recording if you prefer to watch a video rather than listen to this podcast. Thanks for listening. Have a great day, and keep writing the wrong way.